All right, so you've heard it on the news, you've heard it all around the interwebs, and the whole thing with agent real estate commissions are in the hot seat. And so today I'm joined by Natalia Paulino. How you doing, Natalia?
Great.
So there's a lot to go through. We probably won't go too like in the weeds today. We'll just cover the broad overarching topics, and hopefully also dispel some myths or some bad narratives. Because I do feel like the media and or just the way things are being portrayed are kind of skewed as well. So hopefully we'll bring some light to you in that respect. Um, so I guess in a nutshell, one of if just to give those who don't know some backstory
Right.
or some context, there have been lawsuits, class action lawsuits, claiming that the practices currently in place for the real estate industry is such that they are forcing sellers and buyers to pay commissions, and that there are unfair competitive practices that are in play. And so, unfortunately, unfortunately, you guys decide, right? But they're in a situation where one of the class action lawsuits they lost to the tune of over $1 billion, and there was another one to the similar tune. The second one, which was settled. Now, irony here is we are in a situation where the commissions are under fire, and out of the billions of dollars, the lawyers walked away with something like 30%. So ultimately, the way it broke out, the math broke out, those in the class action lawsuit might have walked away with a couple $1,000s, whereas the law firms have walked out with millions,
Right.
hundreds of millions. So a little irony there, but you know what? It is what it is, right? So without much further ado, let's see. Where do you want to start this off,
I don't
Natalia?
know. I'm actually just really interested in what they wanted to accomplish with this
Mhm.
because it was a lot of like, there's not enough transparency, or people are made to do this. They didn't like making
Mhm.
it seem like they didn't understand. Like when you go over the documents to list a property, it doesn't seem like they fully understood what they were signing. Is that our
Mhm.
fault? I'm gonna say no, and maybe I'll get
Mhm.
backlash on that. And
Mhm.
like if I'm signing a contract with anybody, I'm gonna fully understand what I'm signing for.
Mhm.
Now, I would also say that a lot of the fault can also fall on whatever agent was having these conversations, or multiple agents having
Mhm.
conversations with these sellers and not
Mhm.
fully understanding themselves how to explain it to their clients, right? Because we can start
Yep.
with like commissions have always and will be negotiable.
Mhm.
Like we are trained, like we're not even allowed to say you have to do 6%. At
Mhm.
least that's how we've been trained if we're a part of these boards, right? No, there's agents that aren't part of, you know, LIBOR or the Brooklyn board or things like that, where I feel like we have more training. Would you
Mhm.
agree with that?
Absolutely. And I would I would highlight. I mean, this applies to just about any career that you're ever going to go through, but training is incredibly
Right.
important. And unfortunately, I mean, this is where I can't defend, in that we have by this point seen plenty of agents who have had horrendous training, if any at all,
Right.
and it shows either that or they just didn't care enough to be right professional in the way they handle their business. And so, yeah, I think a lot of this, unfortunately, is kind of pain we brought upon ourselves as an industry, right? Because obviously, no matter what job you've ever been in, there are always bad apples, there are bad seeds.
Right.
But in general, you would like to assume that if it's a failure of training, right, then that should be something correctable. And this might be one of those like gut shots of like, hey, you guys really better start getting your acts together,
Right.
right? And so I think there are a lot of agents in this industry who will be leaving at a faster pace. We have already seen a lot of realtors and real estate agents en masse leaving faster at a faster pace. Honestly, maybe that's not a bad thing, right? Because generally speaking, the agents that I've seen, including yourself, Natalia, those who are on top of their game and do things the right way, they tend to have more longevity in this career,
Right.
in this industry. And for them, if anything, this is going to make their jobs somewhat easier, right?
Mhm.
If I'm being honest, right? Um, I mean, the buyer side of it might be something that they need to navigate. But I mean, if you're being honest, most of the top end agents tend to be listing agents, right?
Right.
So there's that.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
going back to transparency, right? It's all about transparency. And now we won't be listing, like if there's going to be a co-broke, now it's no longer going to be visible on the multiple listing service where most agents are
Mhm.
going in to search for homes for their clients. Some people will automatically want to see what's commission is being co-broke so they know how much they're making on the deal. Now that's not going to
Mhm.
happen. I think we spoke about is that transparency. And the negative side to that is
There isn't, right? And this is the irony of it all, right? They're like, we're doing this so that there's better transparency, and in this case, I can't even argue with like trying to protect consumers. This is almost like to, in there, I guess from the opposing argument is to prevent them from being predatory towards sellers and buyers. Now, here's the problem, right? We're not going to be allowed to say list out, put on MLS what the buyer's compensation is going to be, right? The problem is there will be unscrupulous agents, unfortunately, that hey, when John calls me, he goes, "Hey, I got a buyer. Is there a buyer's commission in this deal? Like, is your seller allowing it?" I might be like, "Yeah, maybe it's 2%, 2.5,
right.
whatever whatever that rate is going to be." And then maybe Sally calls, and maybe he doesn't like Sally.
Maybe he
So
suspects
hey,
it,
is there a commission? Yeah, and then it turns into it's it either is none or maybe it's 0.5.
right?
How's that fair, right? How's that ethical, right? And so for me, it's kind of, there is more power in the listing agent side. I'll concede, and I will still urge anyone and everyone just do what's common sense, do the right thing,
Right.
right? Be fair in your practices, be ethical. But again, it's not above board, right? So you can't list it, you can't put it anywhere in the description. So how are people to know? And now this is another thing that is a very touchy subject, but buyers agents are not supposed to be looking at commission and like steering
So
clients to
it's
listings,
like they're
right?
supposed to be looking for their client, not their best interest on where can I get the most money
Correct.
by showing this house versus another house that might be a lower commission.
Correct. Right. And now you can concede in this particular case, maybe this will correct that issue, but I don't see that happening.
Right.
Right. So now the other side of it is now buyers agents are required to get a buyer agency agreement signed. Right. But for me, it's if there is, you're going to deal with a population of buyers, right, who cannot afford to pay this out of pocket.
Right.
Right. And so it may be in a situation of like, and this is arbitrary numbers, right? I mean, just to make this ridiculous, and so you don't come after me of like trust act issues or whatever. Let's say it's 1,000%, right? It's it's gonna be 1,000%, but whatever if there is a co-broke from the listing side, maybe whatever they covered, and then you cover the difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then the buyer goes, "Look, man, I really can't do it," right? And well, we'll figure it out. Then I might be in a situation where I'm gonna be like, well, if the listing side doesn't offer anything, well, I'm not gonna go to the house because I gotta get paid somehow. I gotta get ends to meet, and I gotta pay bills. Or the buyer will just say, you know what, hey, specifically, I'm not looking at houses because I can't afford to pay you, and I need to pay you. Just eliminate any listings that don't provide any kind of compensation for you because that's the only way you're gonna get paid,
Yeah, I just
right?
foresee this whole thing prolonging the long process we already go through with sales here
Mm-hmm.
in New York
Mm-hmm.
because as a listing agent, when they're reviewing offers, if they have multiple offers, they're going to have to go through each one very carefully to fully understand the terms. And then,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether, you know, the offer is going to be written into, this, the commission is going to be written into the offer, or, they're going to do it through seller's concession or whatever the case is. It's just a longer conversation. And then they're going
Mm-hmm.
to have proof of everything that's being offered. And then we have
Mm-hmm.
to worry about appraisal, right? Because if they're trying to wrap it into their offer, then we have appraisal issues. So I just feel like this isn't helping anyone, and the numbers are not going to change at the end of the day. Like
Mm-hmm.
who's paying what? At the end of the day, the buyer is the one bringing the money to the table. The buyer is the one that's
Mm-hmm.
providing, all the funds to pay everyone at the end of the day.
Yep. And it's a really unfortunate, right? I mean, like part of the thing is, there was I did hear like, oh well, you might be able to just get it through the sales concessions, but if talk to, I encourage you to talk to your lenders, hey, is there a limit to how much in
Right.
seller concessions we're able to take, right? So if based on that limitation, well, if a portion of that ends up being to pay off your buyer's agent, well, guess what? Now maybe you needed that for repairs.
Or
Maybe you
the
needed
other
that to
closing costs.
exactly. So again, you're not like how is the buyer winning in this case, right? And another interesting fact that someone has brought up was a dual agency is sticky, right? There are a lot of jurisdictions that don't even allow for it. But if I'm a listing agent, I had my duty is to my seller,
Right.
is my client. I have no duty to the buyer, right? And so this is where like I kind of pin this with the same logic as most dudes, the equation to their ability to fight, right? It's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure if I get into a fight with a bear, I'll win. No, you won't, dude, right? And so an agent who is worth their salt, they've done this enough times where I let's talk about the agents in our office, right? For instance, yourself, and so especially the top end agents, they've sold more houses in a month than you will have in your lifetime.
Right.
They've dealt with negotiations day in day out. What makes you think that you're going to out negotiate them? What makes you think, like, especially they know they have no duty outside of breaking legal, right, statutes? What makes you think that you're going to out negotiate or outmaneuver them? That's a ridiculous statement, right? Unless you get lucky with an agent who just started last week, they don't know what they're doing, and they start slipping, right? It just realistically, it just doesn't make sense. And the other side of it, and from an attorney, he mentioned, look, part of the beauty of having a buyer's agent is that the buyer is insulated from having direct contact from the seller, and that's a good thing. In that, a good agent, we like as realtors, as real estate agents, we have ethical codes, right? And so we cannot discriminate and we cannot violate fair housing practices, right? But if the seller knows who the buyers are, and let's say the seller is racist, sexist, whatever, call it whatever you want, right? They might decide, no, I'm not going to sell to them, right? Now, that's not our fault, is it? Right? And for those who said, well, that doesn't happen, Natalia, how many times have you had a seller be like, hey, just do me a favor, don't let this protected class plug whatever, right? I don't want, right? How many times have they asked you to screen for that?
Right. I mean, that's how we had
And
that fair housing disclosure come out now too, right? Because
mhm,
it was happening.
yep. And there've been plenty of times where realistically, there are some folks, unfortunately, right? The
Something
world
that
is what it
okay,
is.
so something just popped into my head right now, right? Because
Uh-huh.
they were really upset, like these sellers supposedly didn't know like why they're having to pay a buyer's agent commission, whatever the case is. But I'm curious,
Hmm.
they obviously had to buy something else. I'm just assuming most of them were moving, they sold their house,
Hmm.
they had to buy. What happened with their purchase?
That's a good question.
Right? I mean, it's all
Right.
kind of full circle. Like, yes, maybe you did buy, you paid for this buyer's commission, right? Which was like the normal, most of the normal thing that would happen. But when you purchase your
Mhm.
home, didn't the same thing happen for you? So what is the freaking problem?
Yep. Yep. And I mean, there's another, I don't think, like an under, like not as intended thing of, well, part of the buyer's agent is to make sure that things are done correctly,
Yeah,
right? And that the buyer is properly informed on the things that may potentially result in a lawsuit.
right,
So, Mr. and Mrs. or Miss Seller, like what happens if this buyer comes in and let's have all agents out of this picture, right? Like let's go from a physical standpoint, right? And how many times we've dealt with FISBO sellers and they're like, they say all these things that are either incorrect or illegal,
right,
right? And at the end of the day, if like I'm sorry, but if a buyer's agent isn't going to get compensated at all, oftentimes the buyer agent is going to be like, look, I'm sorry, but that particular day, if you want to make an offer on that, you're on your own.
right.
Let's say they close and things aren't quite lining up the way they're supposed to. Well, then wouldn't the buyer be in their right to sue the seller?
Hmm.
So if that if that lawsuit ends up requiring you to pay more than what a commission was, is a gamble you want to take?
Yeah, I don't see,
Good luck.
I'm having a hard time understanding the logic behind it. It's not helping anyone.
Hmm.
It's not helping
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
if they want to crack down on stuff, they should crack down on like if they're saying transparency, it shouldn't be like, oh no, you don't pay, but just like, I don't know, if they need to raise the standards on agents, right, before they go out into the
Yep.
field.
Yep.
And
That would
that could
be.
start at the state when people get licensed, but that can also start within brokerages,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you could I mean, I don't know how to work out, but it would make sense you maybe intern before you're out in the field talking and not really understanding what you're talking about or what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
to these people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's
It's
the main thing, is maybe the standards need to be raised, right? Because everything's so low bar. It's low bar to get your
yep.
license. It's low bar to get into brokerage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's people that I've met as well, agents running deals by themselves, never did a deal before, and they don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, unfortunately, there are also a large population of agents who, they passed the exam, they interview for multiple brokerages. And one of the things that, unfortunately, a lot of them will kind of really harp on is, hey, what are my fees?
Right.
And then the idea that they're giving a percentage I mean, like it varies between brokers, but the idea of giving a percentage to a brokerage, and sometimes those brokerages are garbage. All right, I'm just gonna say it outright, right? Some of them are garbage. They don't actually offer anything, and then so I'm giving up, I don't know, 30%, let's say, for what, right? But the unfortunate other side of it is, I don't know how many discount brokers actually train their agents and provide them with, hey, these are the regulations, these are your ethical standards. As a reminder, this is how you should apply it. This is right. They don't show you or teach you these things, and so you unfortunately again have agents who are kind of left figuring things out on their own, and it's not an ideal. It's not. So again, the ones who have more common sense
Right.
seem to all be offering that solution. I'm a fan of it, right? Get better training, require better training, offer higher standards. You know what? If you want to penalize for infractions, even a little harsher, so be it, right? And but rather than but this presentation of what they think the solution is, I think is ludicrous,
Yeah, it makes no sense.
right?
I can't even think of the upside to it at all.
Uh, I mean, the silver line for me is going to be the the exodus, hopefully, of, I mean, more good agents than bad. um, uh, I mean, there was a person who was like, if I were to be a tinfoil hat wearer, this person was like, if I was a tinfoil hat wearer, it almost seems like they are putting this out and saying, you know what, you want to go back to the 90s era? There was a reason why these were put in the, during the 90s. It was to protect people. And you want to say that this was the bad solution to this problem. Okay, so let's go back to the 90s and see how you like it. Right? And I'm like, oh, okay. you know? And I guess some of the frustration is like some of the things that are being highlighted here, they make it seem like these were things that weren't already in place. The things that were fair were not in place. Let me clarify. Right? So for instance, the way I see this commonly is that they're saying, well, they're no longer going to be required to provide buyer's agents with compensation or percentage of the commissions, right? You, Natalia, you feel like dispelling this one or verifying?
Oh, requiring the co-broke?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're required to give them 50%, Natalia. You're required.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I honestly, if they wanted to, honestly, I believe requiring 50% would make more logic than say nothing at all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
but it's not like it was
saying
we were
choose
required
to
really
or not
beforehand.
do it, or choose to not do it, or choose to whatever. But like, if you're gonna do it, then you should do 50%. Maybe that makes more sense. There's
Right,
no
but were you required prior?
no.
Right. So like for me, it's like, like why are you why are they framing it in a way that as if like we had to, like it was forced. We like
Well, that's
again,
what I'm
this might
saying.
boil
I
down to
wonder
agents.
what conversations were being had, right? Like, what were these
Hmm.
agents saying? Like, when they had these
Right.
conversations, because for somebody to say it was required or they felt forced or whatever the case is, it's like, what were they told? Because
Mhm.
I never tell my clients that.
Right. I mean, for
And I
me,
explained why, right? I explained why we would do commission and how much is offered out and why it makes sense. And a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
had to go back to like when these agents are helping their like buyer agents help their clients, it would only
Mm-hmm.
make sense too that a lot of them might actually look for the higher commission first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whether that's ethical or good or bad, like doesn't matter because it's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now like they have the option to not list it or give 0% out. And is that in the best interest of the client? I would say no, because there's still going to
Mm-hmm.
be agents like myself, and I'm actually waiting to see what our office is going to say if they're going to require it as like a whole office thing that we still put a co-broke out there, or if they're just going to allow us to decide on our own. But I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it looks better, and it's in our client's best interest that we do still co-broke, and it's advertised and it's put out there.
Mm-hmm. It gets interesting,
Yeah,
right? I mean, like
I'm sure
I've been
everybody's
in
going to
plenty
feel
of deals
different
where,
about it. There's probably going to be agents that agree with it, and some that agree with me, and
yeah, and
we can't make everybody
it
happy.
gets interesting, right? And for me though, it's weird, right? Because the idea that you're forced to take whatever percent, right? I see, in the headlines you always see 6%, right? They're like, oh, the six guaranteed, the mandatory 6%. I don't know how many deals I've seen that are 6%, right? On the commercial line, you might see 8 to 10,
Mhm.
sometimes more. I mean, usually not more, but right. But I've been in plenty of deals where it might have been like the total compensation was, I don't know, like 4%. I've seen 1, 3, and my cut might have, like, if I was on the buying end, I might have ended up with 25% of that, right? Likewise, I've had listings where, unfortunately, because I tried to get it sold, I gave up the lion's share of the commission to the buyer's agent,
Right.
right? I walked away with, I think, 15%,
I think in the past
right?
too,
But
I've even had to make the deal work out. We reduced our commission because I think it ended up maybe the appraisal. I forget what the case was, but the buyer was short probably 5,000, I think.
mhm,
And then the lender offered some type of credit, so we had like 2,000 left, something like that. Had a conversation with the buyer's agent, you know, she's asking, she was like, the buyer didn't have that extra money, so what are we going to do? And I said,
mhm,
well, I mean, you're welcome to cut your commission. And she
mhm.
wasn't willing to do it. She's like, why should I do it? I'm like, that's your freaking client. So then at the end of the day, I had to sit back and decide what I was going to do. So I came back at her and I'm like, what do you want to do? You want to go half and half? Because I'm not willing to lose a deal over like $1,000,
Mhm.
And then we end up coming to the agreement. But at the end of the day, I wanted to be like, F you. Like, that's your client.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. But these
But
are these are the moves.
I
These.
also went in the mentality that like I'm putting my client's best interest, and my client's best interest was to close because he already had
Mhm.
a contract on the home he was moving into that he was buying. So I don't know if every agent's willing to do that, but
Mhm.
that's where like I guess your morals come in, or like what you're as an agent, that's like what do you call it? Your standards, your values, that you're putting your
Mhm.
client's interests first.
Yeah. And like this is just another highlight of there's no real mandatory standard. Now, to be clear, I could see more cases where let's just because it's all over the headlines, right? Let's just use 6% just because, again, right? Like there's no we still see commissions that vary, right? So again, just for the sake of headlines, right? 6%. Let's say I'm saying, look, I based off all the work and my fee I think is going to be fair to be 6%, right? And let's say the seller goes, well, I want 3%. Well, again, the seller, you could always negotiate whatever that is, but I'm not obligated to take that 6%, right? I can just say, you know what, you could always list with someone else,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you want to say that, like, I as an agent now have to take whatever percentage that the seller wants, that's kind of crazy too, right? And you're forcing me to whatever, like, so then if they go 5.5%, that makes sense? I don't think so. So like another thing that kind of gets interesting is, for instance, when you go buy a car, right? Most people will shop around to multiple dealerships, right?
Right.
So if for whatever reason, as you negotiate with, say, dealership number one, if they're not giving you the rates or the pricing or whatever that you want, again, you're free to walk, right? And you can say, hey, this is my price, and maybe I don't like the rates that you're giving. So can you come down on it? And if they say yes, that's great. If not, then hey, is there a middle ground? Right? If that's not satisfactory, you could always go to another dealership, right, and negotiate with them. There's no, yeah. I mean, that's the one thing that kind of like it's a head scratcher, and I do understand the frustrations because on our end we see it. We're in this industry, right? We see it day in day out. I can see a situation where people feel or they don't know, right? So I'll give a little discount for ignorance because not everyone has bought homes, right? They're not that necessarily deeply involved in this industry. So maybe they really do believe that like if an agent comes in and says you have to go 6%, the next agent will, like all agents across the board will say demand 6%. I could see that maybe, right? But I don't think that makes sense in reality.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. Yeah, that's there's a lot to get off our chest.
Yeah, it's crazy right now. I feel like we already have to worry about enough stuff, and here's another thing that popped up. How silly it is. I think it's more damaging for everyone, the
Mhm.
buyer, the seller, the agent, everybody. It's just like
Yeah.
more mess. It's a bigger mess
Well,
that we already deal with enough. We take forever to close here in New York already. Now let's add another month to
yeah.
that as we like negotiate all of this stuff out.
I do try to figure out who, if I was to like put it on a tier system of who ends up winning in these cases. And I tend to agree with someone else's assessment of it's going to be institutional buyers and investors,
Right?
right? Because
It's so silly.
they don't necessarily need buyers agents.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back. Like even if they don't pay the buyer's commission with their sale, they're still gonna have to do it
Mm-hmm.
with their purchase. Whereas before
Mm-hmm.
they paid it up front, but they didn't do it on their purchase. So I'm like you're flip flopping it, but at the end of the day, like you're still paying at some point. And I would say you're
Mm-hmm.
actually gonna pay more because
Mm-hmm.
typically most of the time I see people upgrading, not downgrading, right? Like you're moving up a
Mm-hmm.
level, so you're paying more for your next property, so you're paying more for your
Mm-hmm.
buyer's agent. Does that make sense? Because
I mean, you want to see like how this might change, right? Like, for instance, on a buyer's agent side, maybe is it a retainer now?
yeah,
Is it? Am I going to bill you hourly? Because here's another one. So they were like, oh well, why is it that an agent gets his commission and wouldn't an attorney be able to do the same thing? And
yeah.
I'm paying the attorney anyway. Now let's think about this. The attorneys, the ones that are worth their salt, and some of them, I mean, look, the rates change, right? They
Attorneys
vary,
work in an
but I don't know of
office. They
any.
don't go out.
Correct.
They're
They're not going to
not
come
going to
see
see
the
the
house with you. Not going to go to your
property,
appraisal.
right? They're not physically there to
Right.
look at the home or give any suggestions, like
They're not going to run
actually
comps.
even
They don't
being
know
there in
it.
person.
Right. But on the flip side, think about billing. Do you really think an attorney is not going to bill you an hourly rate of like $300, $400, $500? How long does it take to buy a house? How many times? How many times have you been with a buyer and you had to see like over a dozen houses? How many hours? Right?
Yeah,
Because some of the attorneys that I know, the minute they bill in like 6 minute increments.
right.
Right? So if it took you 20, 30, 40, 50 hours to even find a house that you liked, could you imagine the billing on that from an attorney? That you're out of your mind,
Right.
right? So for me, the only like it's not something that makes sense. It just doesn't. So again, from the buyer's agency side, maybe it is a retainer, maybe it's like a la carte menu service, which I still will say probably won't save you money. Now from the listing side, maybe now does that mean that hey, like if you like this listing, maybe they'll back end it and say, look, I'll help you with the purchase as well, but now I want say 7-8% or whatever, right? Because they might say, look, the argument is here is your house that you move to is a high price point. I think it's fair for me to kind of figure out a rate that makes sense for all of us. So are you actually going to save? I don't know, right? I think the seller might say, thanks for the sale. I'm going to go figure out the buy side on myself on my own. Maybe, but I don't, right? But the first time home buyers, what do they know? Like for me, that's an unfortunate thing, right? Like the first time home buyer, I think is like the absolute hardest hit in all of this,
Right.
right? Because an investor, large institutions, they don't need a buyer's agent really, right? And they probably have the funds and the ability to handle all of that, right? So this I see being much harder for this. I mean, I think long term, I see this being a net negative, even for sellers, if you think about it that way.
Agreed. I think it's a
I,
negative.
and I'm curious because for those who do listen in on this, I kind of want to hear your arguments and
I would love to hear more feedback and more like what other people think about what's going on.
Yeah, and this is I love hearing these debates because part of it is, and I see this in a lot of other types of arguments. When you make like if you make a point, I kind of want to focus in on, is it a point based off of things you wish were, or are we basing points off of what actually are, right? Right. So, and I think this is where unfortunately people get stuck. And I've noticed that when I do wishful thinking type arguments, well, you're gonna find yourself very upset because it doesn't the world doesn't work that way,
Right.
right? For better or for worse.
Agreed.
But any other morsels for now?
No, now I'm seriously going to be thinking about they just popped into my head, because at the end of the day, you're paying, you're gonna end up paying both either way. Like when you're buying and selling, like the logic behind this, and just I don't know. I haven't really thought about it too much because I figured like, oh, when it actually really comes into effect, then I'll really think about it and I'll go more in depth on like
Mm-hmm.
the pros and the cons and like how it makes sense, doesn't make sense, and
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, if y'all got a chance, comment down below
Yeah,
of your
let's get
solutions.
some more.
Like, what is your fix to this, right? Because I have a hard time seeing it. I do, and look, I'm not saying our current system is perfect, but I'm the first one to say there are very many holes and gaps in logic currently still. But I don't think this is the fix,
Right.
right? So for now, we'll table that for now. Natalia, you mind telling folks where to find you?
Yeah, I'm easily found on Facebook and Instagram. My full name, Natalia Paulino. Always a phone call away or text away, 347-941-4246.
Perfect. All right. Well, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.